Welcome to the Sega Saturn review project on enemyzero gaming, where we look at, 30-year-old games and judge them based on the good, the just okay, and the ugly. This time, we have Guardian Heroes for the Saturn, made by Treasure, which in my mind really redefined the beat-em-up genre when it was originally released. The second Treasure game I ever played originally after Gunstar Heroes, and it's the 7th in its amazing catalog. Guardian Heroes was made exclusively for the Sega Saturn, and it was released in 1996. It's an incredibly unique 2D beat-em-up game, but with a really cool mix of RPG elements, including a storyline. Storyline told through branching dialogue paths and really quirky and unique cast of characters to choose from. It definitely has all the hallmarks of a Treasure game in there for sure. And Treasure is my favorite company of all time, ever. Right after Sega. Because I loved Gunstar Heroes so much on the Sega Genesis, I knew I had to have it once I heard about this game in Game Fan magazine, my magazine of choice back in the day. Treasure's games are so unique, especially gameplay-wise. Obviously, they push the graphics too in all their games, which, they're definitely known for. Guardian Heroes didn't disappoint in either of those senses. And I do think it still holds up as a fun time even today. I do have Let's Plays on the channel. I actually played it in 2-player with my son, and it's up on the channel if you want to see. So it's a great game, but it's not perfect, and we'll talk about that below. But I had so much fun with this game back in the day. I played it so much, and it's so much fun still to this day. So way back in 1996, it was probably, I think it was the second or third Saturn game I ever owned. The first was Panzer Dragoon. From launch, and this came out, I don't know, 5-6 months after the Saturn was out, so it was definitely in my top 3 or so games that I ever owned for the Saturn, for sure. And I'm super nostalgic for it, super. But does the game still stand on its own merits all these years later? So let's talk about gameplay first, because it's definitely a little unique. Most beat-em-ups from the 8-bit and the 16-bit era, you could sort of freely move around the screen. It was obviously a fake 3D plane. It wasn't real 3D back then, but it was it faked like it's 3D. You could move in and you could move out freely. Now, as in 1996, with things like sprite scaling so easy to do on the Sega Saturn, they actually chose a different route with Guardian Heroes. So instead of sort of freely moving in and out of the background, you basically have 3 planes that you can jump between with the press of a button. And some people don't like this, but I think they chose to do it this way because of the gameplay style. As some of the characters all the characters have basic and strong, melee attacks, but they also use magic spells. And some of the characters are way heavier on the magic side of things than the, punchy side. And you can do magic in 2 ways, essentially. You can push up a button and it brings up like a thought bubble. You can cycle through the spells and, choose one and press the button again, and then you'll do the spell. Which is obviously, it's a little bit of a slower way to do it. The other way, some spells can be done with sort of like fighting game motions on the controller, like a quarter circle forward fireball motion. And if you could actually move up and down, freely move up and down, throughout the screen, it would be much harder to pull off the moves, because as you do the moves, your character would be wonking in different directions and going up, and maybe by the time you do the motion, they're not in line with the enemy anymore, so it'd just be failed. So to me, I think, obviously, it's just conjecture, but I think that's a big reason why they chose to do it like that. It's unique, but it works pretty well. It makes it pretty easy to dodge attacks as long as you're not on the same plane as an enemy. And you'll for sure know if you actually are going to hit the enemy, if they're on your plane or not. RPG element-wise, you also get experience for destroying enemies, and can use skill points in between the levels to level up specific stats however you want. Customize your character however you want. Agility, wisdom, strength, it's all there. The storyline is pretty well done also, especially because the game features 5 different endings based on what order you proceed through the levels. There's a ton of different levels, and it's almost like a choose your own adventure gameplay loop, and it's pretty great, and it helps with the replayability quite a lot. Most of the endings are sort of drastically different based on your choices, like your path to get to the end, and it's really fun to try and get and see every level in the game. Again, I have videos up of all the levels in the game and all the endings too. But I mean, that is a pretty low bar, honestly, for beat 'em ups. Because beat 'em up storylines are typically just beat people up, rescue girlfriend. That's it. So I mean, they really didn't have to do too much. But this is Treasure, people. They gotta make it unique and weird. And the storyline is no exception in Guardian Heroes. No spoilers here, but it revolves around a band of merry thieves that find a golden sword, and in their rush running from the knights, hunting them down, the sword awakes a mysterious golden warrior that joins your party. And as you go through the game, you can choose different dialogue options that will branch you into different story paths. But there's some overlap in some of the stories. There's a general overarching storyline that the different branches are taking you through. And the way they actually did it, you almost need to see all the endings and levels to get like a full picture of the full story. And a quick summary is it's basically an ancient tale of a war between sky and earth spirits and where humanity sort of falls into it. It's not super in-depth, but it's way more than you normally get in a game like this, and it's a plus for sure. So now that you know what Guardian Heroes is, let's get into the good, the just okay, and the ugly. So the good. The personality of the game is utterly amazing, and that's where Treasure always shines. When the game was released, there was literally nothing like it on the Saturn or the PlayStation. Nothing. Quirky storyline? Check. Wacky character designs? Check. Terrible old school box art thanks to Sega of America? Double check! Woo! All the unique hallmarks of a Treasure game are here, and again, they make the experience so fun. Treasure is my favorite game company of all time because they've always done stuff a little differently. I always commend companies and people for doing that, not just doing what everyone else is doing, do their own thing, and that's what Treasure did with Guardian Heroes. The graphics, for the most part, are definitely one of the game's strengths too, with one exception. We'll talk about that later. The Saturn was a sprite crunching machine. We all know that. And Guardian Heroes really showed off the capabilities at times because there's a ton of sprites and characters on the screen at once. They're all rotating and scaling and flipping around and doing magic effects and all this crazy graphical goodness. And it obviously you can't stand up to 2D games made today with fancy stuff we have today. Fancy things, shiny things. But when the game was released in 1996, it was a high mark for graphical effects, for sure, in the early lifespan of the Saturn and the PlayStation. Just the mass amount of stuff going on the screen at once is crazy at times. Crazy. Another great thing is there's some killer multiplayer in the game too. You can play through the story with a second player. So you can go through, co-op, and you do have the Golden Warrior with you too. So it's almost like 3 players, essentially, even though the Golden Warrior is just computer controlled. And you can loosely give him commands. But there's also a 6-player battle mode if you have a multi-tap where you can Basically, choose any character in the game, including enemies, bosses, little rats, skeletons, or chipmunks. Maybe he's a chipmunk, I forget. I think there's over like 45 characters, which is pretty insane. But in an era where couch co-op is clearly obsolete today, with the interwebs, back in the day it was just so fun to go through the game with a real person. And me and my son playing it modern day, not too long ago, we had a blast. And the last really good thing about the game, in my mind at least, is the fact that it does have multiple endings and branching story paths, which really help with the replayability. The biggest negative of a typical beat 'em up to me, even modern day beat 'em ups, even ones that come out nowadays, like the new Streets of Rage and River City Girls, is they get super repetitive. You're just doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over. But with Guardian Heroes, the different storylines, the choose your own, levels, and the character differences. All the characters play slightly different. Some are faster, some are more magic, some are more, brute force. Like, there's definitely a lot of variety there, and it definitely keeps you interested to try to get all the different endings, use all the different characters, and all that good stuff. And now they're just okay with the game. The things that I think are just okay. They're not great, they're not terrible, they're just okay. Is probably the magic system. And look, I really don't know how they could have done it better, but it's very slow with some of the magic heavy characters. To bring up the magic menu, cycle through 6 to 8 magic spells to find the one you want. And by the time you find the spell you want, if you get hit out of that menu, you have to bring it up and start all over again. So it's like, bring up the menu, cycle through 4 things, get hit. Oh, I didn't get the spell I want. Okay, but let me bring it up again. Cycle through 3 things. Oh, I got hit again. You know what I mean? So it's that sort of gameplay loop. So it's kind of a tedious system if you don't have all the characters' motions memorized, like the fighting game motions. And it leads me, at least personally, to always lean towards sort of the hand-to-hand combat characters. So it is just an okay thing. It's definitely cool. It's definitely unique. But it is a little tedious. And now the ugly. The most notable thing. Actually, the only thing on my ugly list. Well, one of the only things is the slowdown. So with the number of sprites on screen at once that Guardian Heroes does, obviously some slowdown can be expected. And it definitely is here, and it sometimes happens for huge chunks of certain levels. But in its defense, obviously this was a very early Saturn game, very cutting edge graphically, so I trust Treasure did the best they could with the slowdown, but it's definitely there, it's definitely noticeable. Whether it's a deal breaker for you, that's a decision you have to make up for yourself, but it is pretty ugly at times. But honestly, that's about it for the ugly. There's really way more positives with the game than negatives for sure. The graphics, for the most part, are amazing. So, Guardian Heroes is still one of my favorite Sega Saturn games of all time. Might be nostalgia talking, but maybe not. It's a real high point in Treasure's gameography. Is that a word? Gameography. And I love the graphic style, the storyline, the quirky characters, and the new stuff that it brought to the genre. It really reinvented the genre a little bit, in my mind at least, from, Final Fight and those ones on like the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, Streets of Rage. And the good news is there are some modern ways to play the game, as it was remastered slightly for an Xbox Live Arcade version, which I believe is backwards compatible. You can still play it on the Xbox One today. With crappy, blurry graphics. And I mean that in jest. Some people like them, okay? I hate smooth pixel graphics. It looks so bad to me. I hate it. I love pixels. I want to see pixels. But that's a me thing. And they did improve a lot of the other aspects of the game, like the dialogue they rewrote, the controls a little bit better. They even gave, different moves like air cancels and stuff like that. And it even has online matchmaking, so you can play the multiplayer online with other Guardian Heroes. So if you got to play it that way, play it. It's an amazing game, so much fun, and it's definitely one of the highlights of the Sega Saturn library in my mind. So thanks for checking out this quick review. More on the way. Peace.